Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 25. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a photo shoot I did with the artist Maggie Ayres, who also happens to be my wife. So, a couple of different photo shoots I've done. One where she was in her studio a couple of years ago. We've also got a more recent one, which was done during lockdown here at home. Then, in the second part of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, I'm going to be looking at a few photos that have been sent in for a bit of feedback, where VG asks quite how she might have been working with these pictures of parrots. Also a little bit about portrait photography. And if you're photographing something like light bulbs, how do you get the filaments to actually show up rather than just becoming a blur? And what I'll also be talking about, Gary asked the question whether it makes a difference or if you title an image. So these are the things that are going to be discussed this evening. If you find any of this useful, if you would like to support these podcasts, then do please go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can make a small contribution. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. And also, yes, here I am on Facebook. It's live. Comments always welcome. Join in. Let me know you're here. Say hi. If this is your first time here, let me know where you're from as well. That's always nice to know. There is this little bit of I'm sitting in a room talking to a lump of plastic with a lens on the front of it. It's kind of nice to know that I'm not here on my own. So yes, please leave comments, and if you get questions as we go, then please write them in. I don't look at them absolutely live as I go, because otherwise I tend to get distracted, but I do set aside various points throughout the evening where I will go and take a look and read out the comments, see what you've asked, do any responses. So, hopefully then, that gives you an idea of what's coming up tonight. So, with that out of the way, let's start off then with artist Maggie Ayres. Now, the thing is with Maggie, she's been a full-time professional artist for the best part of about 15 years. Though she's always been incredibly creative and expressing her art, many different kind of creative outlets over the years. Now, we've been together for nearly 30 years. Yesterday was our 25th wedding anniversary. That's kind of, I thought, well, okay, let's feature her on tonight's podcast. It's a kind of, I would have featured the photos anyway, because they're a set of photos I did for an artist. I think, but what kind of makes this a little bit more interesting is really the fact that it's a whole different ball game as a photographer when you're actually photographing your wife rather than any other client. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. A part of the thing comes from when you are photographing someone, most people are a bit nervous in front of the camera. Most people, in fact, really dislike having their photo taken. We've talked before about this, and any portrait photographer will let you know that 99% of people feel uncomfortable with having their photo taken. We've talked before about notions of face being the wrong way round, or badly lit photos, people taking photos of us when they don't really know what they're doing, us just looking in horror at the way we thought we looked. It doesn't match up with the way we apparently look. So a large part of being a portrait photographer is about getting the person in front of you to feel more comfortable. Now, in a way, you would think photographing your own wife, I ought to be several steps ahead of the game here. Surely she's already more comfortable. But there's a slight problem with the fact that Maggie, just like so many other people, hates having her photo taken. And I have a whole bunch of psychological tricks and techniques to make people feel more comfortable in front of the camera. One of those aspects is projecting a certain level of confidence that, but I mean, I try to be genuinely warm and friendly, relax people, let them know that I'm on their side. But you also have to infuse that with a certain amount of, I know what I'm doing. Sometimes even when you don't. The problem is that Maggie, having been married to me for 25 years and been with me for nearly 30, knows me inside out. She knows every slight twitch of the eye or raise of the eyebrow or putting my mouth to one side of my face or anything, and she can read. And so I know that if I take a photo that she's not going to like, then she's going to feel worse about it. So so the pressure's on. But if I start worrying about it, she's going to see the lack of confidence in me. Then I know she's seen that. So then I become even more unconfident, which she picks up on even more. And you end up in this spiral downhill where the whole thing can absolutely fall apart. So there was a lot of prep work going on before we did the first major photo shoot we did together was a little over 2 years ago, back in 2018. And Maggie had a major exhibition called Orchard coming up. And we needed some photos for press releases, for magazine articles. And we wanted to get some photos of her in her studio, being the artist, but also owning the space, being unapologetically the artist. But it took quite a lot of prep work, from days, weeks, possibly months before, in a way, laying the groundwork ready for the photo shoot. So I'll show you a couple of the photos that we actually did do. We had some. I'll show you a couple here. First of all, I did some photos which were the close-up at work. So there she is with a cloth, wiping with a scalpel, cutting into the wax. So at this point, Maggie's primary medium outlet was encaustic, which is wax melted with damar resin, and then it's layered up over boards. So you paint the wax down, put another layer on, rub inks and paints into it, put more layers on, scratch and gouge into it, rub other bits in, layer found objects or rust printed paper or all sorts of things. And bit by bit, these boards would layer up with, and there's something about the wax where each layer is translucent to a degree, but the more layers you get, the layers further down sort of disappear into the mists as such. So it's quite an incredible, it's a painstaking process, long process, as she melts each layer and puts the next layer on. Absolutely fascinating. So we wanted to try and get some sort of close-up shot, here, sort of rubbing ink into the scratches, dripping the wax onto the canvas. So we done sort of several shots like this, but then we sort of wanted to get a shot. I think this was one of Maggie's favourites. And you can see, there's a strong board. These are quite weighty, really. You've got quite a large board, and then the layers of wax would sort of build up. So she was part way through this one. We're down in her studio in Kakubri, and you can, see a couple of other pictures on the wall in the background. Photos where somebody's not looking into the camera are an awful lot easier than photos where people are looking into the camera, because the moment they look into the camera, they become very self-conscious about the fact that they're looking into a camera. So this is one of those things where I've kind of built up my speciality with portrait photography, is about getting people to look into the camera. It's a harder thing to do, but it's more rewarding, because if you can get it right, the person is engaging with the viewer, and there's something really quite powerful about that. So what we wanted with this set of photos was about Maggie really looking like she owned the space. This was her domain. She wasn't taking any prisoners, but in that creative environment. There's a warm smile about the eyes, but there's also a kind of no-nonsense level to it as well. We've got her workspace piled up in front of her, pictures in the background, and then we also went for a fun shoot where she's got the blowtorch, which she, genuinely uses for, on the wax to melt layers down. I think there was one or two magazines particularly like this kind of picture and would, feature it more than the others. So that was the first shoot we did. Things changed when lockdown happened. We could see it coming, and the week before officially it all closed down in the UK, we did a sort of last minute dash down to the studios, grabbed various bits of equipment to bring back home, because we knew we could see that the way it was going. That because the studio that Maggie works in Kakubri is a building with about, I think it's 15 different studios in it. And sure enough, the following week, they were shut down. The artists weren't allowed into their studios for a good couple of months. And even now, if they're going in, it's under highly restricted circumstances, and not really conducive to the way Maggie can work. So we brought a whole pile of stuff back, but we weren't... In our house isn't really designed to have the studio in. So there was a problem about trying to find makeshift space. And so Maggie ended up down in the living room for a while. She sort of took over one half of it. We got a trestle table out, stuff got piled up, Maggie would work away in the space. And, that was working okay. She started experimenting a lot more with watercolours and graphite and mark making. So she wasn't really able to do the wax. Well, by this time she'd already moved on to a different medium of cold wax and oil paints. But the oil paints and stuff didn't really... Well, we hadn't brought them back from the studio, and our space wasn't really suitable for it. So she got into working with watercolours a lot more. And then what happened was, there was a couple of months ago, I came into the house, or rather, I came into the room, and I just sort of plonked myself down on a chair, and I glanced across at her, and from the angle I happened to be sitting at, this was a photo I took with my phone. I quite liked the fact I was looking through her bits and pieces spattered over the table, and Maggie just concentrating, working away. And we've got a couple of her older pictures sitting on the walls in the background, and it's all very chaotic. But it's us. It's our life, in lockdown. And I thought this could be interesting. What if we could we do a photo like this? But to do a proper one, sort of set it up with the lights and sort of try and do something which would be magazine quality or poster quality if we wanted. So we kind of talked about the idea, and then other things got in the way, and another month or two went past. And anyway, one day we decided that the only way we're actually going to get this done is set aside, put a date in the diary and said, right, we're going to do this shoot as though, you're a paying client and I'm just going to be setting up and all the rest. So come the day, we actually sort of sat down. Now, what I thought I would do is I will just take you through the set of photos from the sort of first test shot through to the final edited image. I can't remember exactly how many photos are here, sort of somewhere between 15 and 20. Just so that because when I've done this before, it's always proved reasonably popular. So people sort of see that you don't. I suppose the myth that I'm always trying to debunk is the idea that somehow with photos you turn up, you go click, and you have the perfect photo. And there's so many photographers seem to almost perpetuate that myth. And it doesn't happen. I mean, if it does happen, it's extraordinarily rare. you take a photo, you look either in the back of the camera, or in the case of what I was doing here, I tethered the camera to my tablet. So when I went click, I could see what was on the tablet straight away. And then you start adjusting. So to show you then the process. So this was the phone camera. And then it's about 6 weeks later, we've now decided, right, we're going to set up. This is a photo in ambient light. What have I got here? I think I've got my ISO is whacked up to 6,400. I've got it on 100th of a second at f7.1. So basically, we've got the overhead light, and it's just, it's no good for photo at all. But that's okay. I just wanted a starting point to know quite what was happening. So what I did was I've got a large softbox. I had it on a stand at an angle in front of the table. And the idea here being that it might emulate window light, or at least it would sort of light her up. Now, my first shot, as you can barely see anything here, I take the shot and then I realise that I've not, the flash is on a lower power, it's not strong enough. It also seems to be tilted down and lighting the front of the table rather than lighting Maggie. So I tilt it up, make adjustments, and so now we've got stage one. I'm just letting Maggie get on with painting and inking and playing while I start mucking around with the lights. So this is our start. Now, so we've got the key light, but it's fairly dull. One of the big things for me is once I've got the space, and I know the space I'm working with, and I know the camera angle I'm going to be working with, the question is, how are you going to sculpt the light? And, this, fine, we've got a light falling down on her, but there's not enough interest. What I want extra layers of light to come into this. So what I do is I take a little off-camera flash, I stick a yellow gel on it just to sort of create a little bit of warmth, and I place it over to the right, just outside the camera. And you can see it sort of lit up the back a bit. Where you can really tell is if you see the shadows here from this candlestick on the wall. If you trace that backwards, you can tell that it's just to the right out of shot here. And I'm thinking, yeah, no, okay, that hasn't worked quite how I wanted it to. So then I take it and I shift it over to the left. So now what you can see is there's bits of the bookcase. I've got it sitting up on the bookcase over there. Part of that's being lit up. And we've got a bit of a light catching the side of Maggie's arm and her hair. And I quite like that, I think, but it's still kind of feeling like I'm really wanting to kind of get a light behind her if it's at all possible. So I then take the light and I put it down in the bottom hand corner to see if that works, and just no. There's a light in the bottom corner. What's it doing there? It's not adding to anything other than creating a bright spot. So now I go and move it back where I had it before, just to kind of remind myself what the light was doing. And I add another one. So I've now got two. So you can see that the shadows are over here. So you can tell that I've still got that one here. But we've also got, the bookcase is lit up with the side of Maggie getting lit up here. So essentially now what I'm doing is I've got the main light coming straight towards her, and I've now got one light off to one side and one light off to the other. I put another one back down in the bottom just to see if that worked, having the two lights. It didn't, so I moved it again. It felt too far away, so I wanted the one to the right of her to be closer in. So I slotted it here behind a sheet of paper. The problem is that this is all brightening up and creating a large hotspot. However, I do quite like the way it's throwing a bit of extra layer of light onto Maggie's face. So I should sort of, lean forward a bit to see what happens. And I think with this one now, that light isn't reaching her face, So I get it to sit back a bit more. I've moved the light forward a bit, but now it's coming out. There comes a point whereby basically this whole bit on the right, while I like the light that's falling on Maggie, I don't like what's happening over here. So a little bit of pondering about, move the light back, play around with the settings, and then I take a sketch pad and I place it over the front there. So the light won't, because it's got cardboard backing and it's quite thick paper, the light itself then isn't going to cut through it in the same way that it did with just the piece of paper on its own. And now we're getting to a point where I'm thinking, yes, I like that. There's a nice light, there's a nice layer, layers are going on here. I'm kind of feeling though that there's a little bit blocking up over here. Maggie's hand is kind of getting lost. So the next thing I do is I move this glass of stuff over here. So you can see just behind this feather here, we've got, now this glass contains strips of paper with titles on of artworks. Now, interestingly, I suppose later on I'm going to be talking about Gary's question of finding titles for your photos and whether it's important or not. So I'll probably make reference to this because Maggie does make titles, and the titles are extraordinarily important in her artwork. So now, does that translate directly across to photography? Well, that's kind of what we'll discuss a bit later. However, we had this glass here full of strips of paper with titles on, was sitting in the way, so you can see I moved it over to the right here, and that opened up more space for, you know, to see the hand. And at this point I thought, right, yes, I'm happy. What we've got is Maggie is involved with her work. We can see the markings she's making on the paper. We've got some of these bits of paper here are all sitting, sort of creating a set of leading lines, moving us in towards Maggie. I've got light coming in from behind this, lighting up the side of her hair. I've got light coming from over here, lighting up this side of her. We've got layers of light going on. And so now all I need to do is edit it. And then so I then spent however long editing it, and that's the final image. And I think we were both rather pleased with it. We've got the layers of light, we've got the sense of the intensity of an artist at work in a space which is a domestic space converted, you know, and it kind of reflects how we were feeling and what Maggie was doing and the space in which she was working. Over the past few weeks, Maggie's been converting our son's old bedroom. He's up in Edinburgh and doesn't look like he's likely to be returning. So she's converting his bedroom into a small studio up there. It's not particularly big, but it's a space you can have out with the living room. But to begin with, we were using that space for other things, and you know, this was all happening in here. So to go back to the other bit which I was talking about, which is to get a photo of somebody actually looking directly into the camera, we then, keeping the same setup, we then set about doing a shoot where Maggie could look into the camera. I won't go through all those photos because in a way it's that's more about trying to we ran into the same problems of Maggie recognising me getting sort of slightly concerned about whether I was going to get the photo. But we got there eventually, and this is one we decided when she was looking directly into the camera she wouldn't wear her glasses because I wanted that absolute eye contact. And I really love this photo. I suppose in a way it's kind of the difference. So I'll come back to that. That's the photo for my wife as the artist at work. This is the photo for me as the husband of the artist who loves his wife. And there was a lot of time for this photo, unlike the photos from 2 years ago where it was about owning the space. what I was particularly looking for here was that warm connection. That connection to me through the camera, which I then think translates to anybody looking at that photo. So that's really, that was the photo. So I thought you might find it interesting. I would kind of take you through the stages of this. Little kind of bonus bit. I'll just talk for those who don't follow me personally on Facebook. Yesterday was as I said, was our 25th wedding anniversary. Now, in an ideal world, we'd have gone off to some exotic city somewhere, some far-flung part of the world, or even just loosely overseas from the UK. On our 24th wedding anniversary last year, I started thinking, next year's our silver wedding. Maybe we could go to Barcelona. Maybe we could go to Paris. Maybe we could go even further. Of course, obviously COVID put an end to that. So we weren't going to go anywhere during lockdown. I thought I would like a photo of the two of us, because actually there's very, very few photos of the two of us. I mean, needless to say, one of us is always holding the camera. So I thought, well, okay, if I was going to do a photo of the two of us to sort of mark, so it's a photo we can look back on and say, okay, that's where we were on our silver wedding anniversary. One of the most important parts of our world at the moment is the Shed Café. Basically what happened was, back at the beginning of lockdown, we realised we couldn't go out for a cup of coffee. We always loved, once a week we would go out for a cup of coffee somewhere, just spend an hour or two chatting, being together, connecting, exploring ideas away from the house. And then, of course, in lockdown, you can't get away from the house. But we are extraordinarily fortunate in the fact that we have a little bit of a garden and we've got a wee shed at the top of it. And so we came up with the idea that we would go out for a coffee once a week to the shed, and we jokingly called it the Shed Café. What was supposed to be a once a week, maybe twice a week, very quickly became a daily routine. Every day now we go out to the Shed Café. And it's become such an important part of our day, because it really does change the mood to be out of the house, even if it is just at the end of the garden. So I thought we would take a photo of that. And to show you then that this was loosely the setup. There's our shed at the end of the garden. Got the washing line here. I've got you can see here, I've got a big stand with a large soft box. This was later in the afternoon. The sun was just kind of cutting through over the top of the shed. All these little blurry bits are mosquitoes. A whole cloud of them underneath the beech trees. Got this sort of set of beech trees at the end of the garden, and clouds of mosquitoes, which amazingly, and I still don't fully know why, but we didn't end up with a bite on us. I think they were just more interested in themselves. But anyway, so the thing was with this was I had to set it up with a timer. So I've got a 10-second timer, I click it, and then I run over, leap into the chair, set myself up. The other thing I did was, the shed looked quite dull just on its own, so I put a light inside the shed, and that kind of created another layer of light going through. And in the end, this was the photo I created for us. And it's quite funny. I'm pleased with it. Maggie's pleased with it. Sun just tipping the top. I had to wait until it stopped getting straight into the camera. It had just gone behind the wall and behind the trees as it was setting. We've got our plants. We've got some wee stone carvings, which are things that I did, 20 years ago. I used to play around with carving bits of sandstone. And we've got the all-important coffee. Mugs by Fitcher McAndrew, another mug by Claire Dawdry, two local potters. And yeah, so that was a kind of bit of fun. And fortunately, Maggie was okay with me taking the photo too. So we got there in the end. The main problem for this was the fact that I couldn't keep going click and then make an immediate adjust. I had to go click, 10-second timer, beep, 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 run round, sit in place, goes off. I was blinking, go back, take a look, wasn't working, lights didn't work. But we got there in the end. So that was kind of fun. Anyway, that's pretty much that. Thought you might find it interesting. So what I will do now is I'll flip over to Facebook and see if we have any comments now. Where I'm looking here, there doesn't seem to be any, which would seem a little bit odd. So I'm just going to, let's put them in terms of most recent. No. Hold on a sec. I'm now looking at the wrong one. That's the 8th of September. Oh, for goodness sake. I presume there must be more. Why am I not getting any more? Yeah, that says 24 comments. I suppose that's Stacey getting in there. I am, but I can't see why I can't. I'll tell you what I'm going to do this. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my tablet and hopefully actually find the video on here. Okay, I think I have them now. Right, so I will need to now refer to my iPad in order to be able. No, it's not an iPad. It's a Google Pixel C, I think. Anyway, so Pat says, fingers crossed my sound works. Hi Pat, hope you can hear me. Maggie, hello everyone. Hi Maggie, I'm glad you managed to. You're writing in there. Stacey, good afternoon, Kim and Maggie. Happy anniversary to both of you. Thank you. Pat, it does. Hooray! Great. Okay, we've got people listening. Okay, where are we at? Stacey, it's a beautiful, brisk beginning of fall here. This weekend went to see a bunch of scarecrows, took photographs of them. Oh, okay, you have photographs of scarecrows? Well, maybe you want to submit one next week, Stacey. We can take a look. Rosie, I've lost Kim. Smiles, frowny face. Right, I hope that wasn't for too long. Brian, good to be with you again. Hi, Brian, glad you could make it. Best wishes to you and your wife on your silver wedding anniversary. Well, thank you, Brian. Maggie, still here. Stacey, a lot of people hate being photographed. I try to make them feel comfortable to help them do a pose. Absolutely needed. Rosie, found you. Hey, you made it back, Rosie. Maggie, no pressure, Kim. Pat, Maggie looks totally at ease. That's because I'm only showing you the final one where she did. So, what have we got? Stacey, I do things with podge. I do wine bottles, vases and boxes. I also do silk flowers. Okay, so mucking around with still life, that's always good. Rosie, do you have a softbox in front of Maggie? Yes, it's a large octagon softbox, Rosie. Probably about that big-ish. Can't remember exactly the size of it. And then it's also got a grid on it. And what the grid does is it stops the light spilling out too far to the side. So it allows me to kind of narrow it in. But because it's a large softbox, it's a nice soft shadows on it. VG, the lighting is perfect and the final output is amazing. Oh, thank you. Pat, a happy result, many congrats. Oh, thank you, Pat. Best way to celebrate togetherness from VG. Stacey, monster mosquitoes. VG, the shoes again. And here we are, we've caught up. Stacey, are you scrolling? And Stacey says, use your phone. Okay, cool. So, hopefully now I can refer to this back when I need to kind of catch up on the comments. So, need to put that somewhere. Okay, place that there, and if you hear a sudden thunk, it's fallen off. Right, okay, there's going to be a lot of editing before this one goes on YouTube. So yes, if you're only catching a little bit of this or you don't have time to watch the whole thing, then I do record these and they go up on YouTube the following day, on Wednesday, usually by Wednesday afternoon, definitely by Wednesday evening, they're usually up online. However, you will then miss out on all the excitement of the absolute live experience, where I can't access comments and I have to charge about all over the place. So the critique section, this is the point whereby you can send in your images or send in your questions, hopefully to get some kind of help with how to move on to the next level with your photography. If you find it interesting, like I say, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Now, amazingly, after last week there being quite a few people shoving stuff in, this week hardly anybody did. Pretty much VG. VG, you're the only one who actually sent me in anything to look at. However, you did send me 3 different images, so we can talk about them. And then Gary asked a really interesting question as too. So I think what we'll do then is we'll work our way through these. and see what happens. So I think what we'll do first of all, we'll start with VG. So if I bring up the text now, she's got 3 different ones here. I think what I'll do, I'll start with the parrots. So what we've got, let's open up Photoshop and drag these parrots in and flip over. So what VG says is vibrant parrots dozing under the sun. I would like to know if cropping the bird's tail and zooming the birds closer would look better. Now, in the Facebook group Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, VG showed this one, but then she also showed a version where she kind of cropped in something a little bit more like that. In fact, does it look better if you crop in? Parrot's got its eyes closed, so we're not catching the eyeball there. So, well, the immediate answer to that, VG, is it depends what you're trying to capture. If you're trying to get that notion of, in this case, it looks like kind of parrot having a bit of a nap with fellow parrot here, or maybe partner, then you need to be zoomed in, I think. If we zoom in, there isn't quite the detail here. What were your settings on your camera here? f4.5, exposure time 100th of a second to 74mm. It doesn't, I don't know whether there's the full detail to really crop in too far with this. But to be honest, I tend to feel with this that part of what's lovely about this is the tails as they come down. There's a nice, you get that really long shape. Again, like I said, it kind of depends what you're going for. If you're wanting to sort of get in on expression of face, then fine, you zoom in, you crop in close. If you're going for the parrot sitting on that piece of wood, I think those long tails coming down actually tend to work a bit better. But I think the part of the problem that you've got here actually isn't so much to do with the crop and is more to do with the exposure. In essence, what's happened is your camera has exposed for the light behind. So these bright leaves on the in the top corner here, these are quite nicely exposed, bit of sunlight coming through the back of them. But the parrots themselves are quite in shadow. So let me show you what happens. If I just duplicate that layer, if I go into Camera Raw Filter, and what I want to do is bring the exposure up a bit. And then what I will do, I'm not going to worry too much about brightening out the background, but what I want you to do is really, and I'm going to bring up the shadows now, and then if I just take those highlights down a little bit, add a little bit of texture, maybe a little bit of clarity. And now you can see we've now got the richness of the colour, because in the end, what it is about the parrot, what is it we love about the parrots, is the colour. It's that incredible, vibrant colour. And you've got the beautiful shape with the long tails coming down. But where it was, if I just click OK with that, you can now see like that. They're not quite silhouettes, but we're not getting that sense of colour. So what I would have suggested with this VG is really that what you needed to do was expose the camera for the parrots and the colour of their plumage, rather than worrying about the getting the light back, because otherwise it's just kind of too dark. So I hope that kind of gives you a better sense there. Other than that, I mean, you can come a little bit closer, but again, I wouldn't really worry too much about that. I think now what you might do is vignette it a bit. I mean, let's go to Camera Raw Filter again. Although having said that, well, okay, let me just see. If I take the vignette, if you darken down a little bit, that sort of just brings the focus back into the parrots a little bit. So we've gone from that to that. and I think you get much more a sense then of the vibrancy of the birds. So hope that helps. Right. Yeah. Of course, the other problem with doing the comments on the pad is, of course, if I leave the pad for a couple of seconds, then it switches off. Okay, looks like I've got another comment from Stacey about the scarecrows. Went to see scarecrows, and of course Dad had health issues and wound up in the ER at 1:30 in the morning. Oh, that doesn't sound very good, Stacey. Sorry to hear that. Hope everything works out okay. Right, if there are any more comments, they're not being shown at the moment. That says all comments. Right, okay, let's place that back over there. So, next thing I want to do then is, okay, I'll do another quick one for VG here, which is about a bit about portraiture. And then I'm going to move on to the notion of Gary's question about titles for photos. But let's start off with this one here. And what VG says is, this is Sejal. I'm going to be pronouncing this wrong again, I know. My sister-in-law, a beautiful person with a beautiful smile. She does have a lovely smile. I'm not sure if I did justice to that smile, yet portrait photography is something I've been wanting to try. Okay. Oh, should be showing you that. Yes. So yes, this is the photo. Okay, unfortunately I'm not going to be able to tell you everything about portraiture and how to do it in 4 or 5 minutes. I could do an entire podcast just about portraiture and keep going for a year without repeating myself. There's a lot of different things you can learn. First thing that strikes me with this is a little bit like your parrot shot is, I think because the background is so bright, she's sort of falling into silhouette a bit more, and I think just lightening her, making a little bit more adjustment so she's a bit lighter, or making sure she's got a darker background behind her is a better way to do it. Now, that aside, with portraiture, there's many different aspects, but let's talk about particularly the 2 kind of key areas to it. One is the technical side of it, which is the background, the lighting, the camera angle, the depth of focus, all those kind of things. The other is the relationship that you have with the person and how well you manage to capture a particular emotion or mood that they are, or that you're trying to get out of them, or that they're expressing. And the trickiest thing of the lot is that if you are trying to get spontaneity, that's much more difficult to do if you've set something, because somebody might give you this beautiful smile in that moment, or you say something, they laugh and it's a lovely laugh and you capture it, except for the fact that the lights didn't go off, and by the time you say, well, okay, let me set up the lights, turn your head here, tilt this way, all the spontaneity is gone. So it is a tricky one, and sometimes what you've got to do is you've got to decide which is the more important bit. Now, she does have a lovely smile, but the couple of things I would say about this, the first thing that strikes me is I tend to feel her head is sort of turned a little bit too far round, so that the whites of her eyes are really... I mean, if you... Okay, what have I got to do? I've got to turn that way, I suppose. If looking at the camera here, if I turn my head a little bit, that's fine. I mean, straight on, okay, that's passport photo kind of thing. Actually, let's flip this over. Let's just flip this to give you a better sense here of a large thing. So straight on, that's fine. It's the most uninteresting form of portraiture, flat on. This is passport photo, purely identifying your features, not particularly making it interesting. Turn the head a little bit, look back. Now we've got sort of depths and layers. We've got sort of something that isn't exactly even. Turn the head a bit more. Turn it completely sideways, and you've now got the profile, but of course I can't see the camera. Now, if I come back and I'm sort of staring like this, you can see my eyes, but it's an awful lot of white of the eye. You know, it feels like I'm really sort of straining my eyes to look round. If I come round to about, let's see, 45 degrees, 30 degrees, 20 degrees, something like that. So I'm just off center, not directly into the camera, not all the way around here, but just sort of off the camera a bit. Then I think that's probably one of the kind of easy, you know, it's a more comfortable, you know, it does look like I've kind of turned to look at you, but at the same time, I'm not sort of straining to look at you. And there's a little bit with the photo of your sister-in-law where it looks like she's sort of really looking round. Let's flip that back. She's sort of really looking round to the side to catch you in. I think if she was turned a little bit more, then there would be more of the iris in the photo rather than the white of the eye, which then sort of engages you a bit more and feels slightly less strained. The other thing, which is one of these things which you can coach people in to a certain extent, is the problem of the sort of leaning back a little bit. She's leaning back and she's sort of coming back, which means what's happening is it's sort of pushing the neck up a little bit. Now, it happens an awful lot, especially because go back to this notion that most people feel a bit uncomfortable in front of the camera. That what happens is we don't like the camera, so we pull back. And because we pull back, all the jowls get pushed up, you know. And at this point you go, well, what's happened to my jawline? Well, I don't really have one anymore, you know. It's just this, you know, even it doesn't matter how much weight I might have lost, you know, if you squeeze back, you know, there's flesh there which is going to push in. Whereas if I lean into the camera, now I have a jawline, you know. It's much more pronounced. Less pronounced here. So there is a notion of one of the things that I'm doing when I do portraiture is and I'm training people in front of the camera, and there's this notion of the difference between leaning into the camera and pulling back from the camera. There's another advantage about leaning into the camera is we lean in when we're engaged with people, when we're listening to people, when we want to know what they're talking about. When if somebody's talking to us and we're just kind of pulling back, or if we're talking to someone and they're pulling back, it's kind of all the wrong signals. You know, they're not comfortable with what we're saying. They're not wanting to engage. It's a negative kind of thing. Whereas if we're talking to somebody and they start leaning in, we automatically feel more engaged. So when coaching people, I suppose the difference again between the notion of, if you like, formal portrait and quick capture. I mean, the reality is with the photo that you took here, VG, quick capture, your sister-in-law is smiling, she's warm, she's friendly, it's a nice photo. If we're talking about the kind of photo that you're wanting for your avatar for LinkedIn or for some business site or something like that, slightly more formal, there is that notion though of lean in a bit. And again, it's not a straight on, just slightly to one side, lean in, as though, you know, I've got an ear coming forward, I'm listening, I'm interested in what you've got to say. And that tends to make a sort of slightly more interesting kind of shape of face with the portraiture. Oh, excuse me. But this is the kind of thing you can spend a lot of time. Well, you practice. You know, find somebody that's happy to let you take their photo and keep trying with it. You'll eventually learn. But yes, so technical side. You know, she sort of, the background is very bright, and she sort of lost a bit. I mean, even though if the background was dark, she was sort of kind of, I think the exposure would seem okay. But I mean, if I just show you briefly, we just lighten her up a little bit more compared to the background. The background's now become very white, but we can see her a little bit better. So getting that balance right is the main thing. Think about the angle of the head and think about whether somebody's pulling back and moving forward. Beyond that, there's 10,000 other things I can tell you, VG, but, you know, start getting the hang of those first, and you might find those particularly useful. Right, I hope you found that useful. So let's see, any other comments? I don't know whether the problem is because I set this to go from the event page that I set up rather than specifically from my ordinary Kim Ayres page. But I am going to have to do something else next week, I think, because this is driving me slightly nuts. Okay, I'll do another little refresh. Oh, no, I do have a couple more. Maggie says, I think that's all. Okay, that's fine. Sheila, very helpful comment for portraits. I'm glad, Sheila. And Rosie, I'm still here. Thank you, Rosie. Okay, good. At least I know that this is working now on here. Good. Right. Okay. Next thing I want to do now is address Gary's point. So let me go over to here. Gary says, how important are titles for photographic images? I've always maintained that the image should stand up for itself, and that titles are an afterthought. But I recently saw some images where the titles gave the images an entirely different framework and caused me to reassess the images that I saw. So in this instance, the title and the image were intertwined. What do other people think? Okay, well, there's another one for the comments as such. Do you love finding titles for your photographs? Do you get horrified by do you have 10,000 photos called Untitled 1, Untitled 2, or just img_1476.jpg, Are titles important? Yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know whether you think. I suppose then, now to go back to what I was talking about earlier with Maggie. For Maggie, titles are extraordinarily important. In fact, very often the title comes first. You might remember in that picture I showed you earlier. In fact, let's just so in this picture here, Maggie has a jar full of title ideas. See the First Sky, I can see written there. I don't think you've actually made that piece yet, Maggie, have you? But I think really, it's coming down to a number of things. Well, it's two primary things. One is the context in which the photo is going to be viewed. The other is how you are with words and whether that's a part of how you do your art or craft. So if we go back to the context, talked a little bit before about the notion of these photo sites where there's kind of online competitions. Every day there's competition, and what happens is you shove in your photos and there's crowd viewing of them. There's hundreds or thousands of people going through voting on photos, and the photos that get the most votes come out the top and win whatever prizes. Now at that point, people are scrolling through hundreds of photos at a time, and they're not looking at titles. Titles don't come up. At that point, it is purely the image. Does the image stand in its own right? And really, does the image stand against the title of the competition? So if the competition is blue and you've shoved in a picture which is predominantly red, it's probably not going to do very well. Even if it's a fantastic picture, it's just the wrong picture for that competition. So in those cases, the titles have kind of been selected for you. So is it about the image, or is it about the words that go with the image? Let's say you were having an exhibition, and you can fill this gallery space. You've got 24 of your photos being beautifully framed up. What titles do you put with them? Are they just untitled 1 to 25? Or are you putting something with them? Now, the first thing we tend to do is maybe it will, if these are landscape photos, we'll put the place. This was taken in the Peak District. This was taken in the Scottish Highlands, or this was taken in Bordeaux, or whatever it is. Doesn't really matter. We'll put the place. If it's portraits of people, we might put their name. But depending on what you put on it, has a profound effect on the way people will interpret it. Now, I did this quite deliberately about, just give you an example here. 9 years ago, I was artist in residence at the Wigtown Book Festival. And what I did was I took, over the course of the 10 days of the festival, I took 173 photos of authors, locals, visitors, all staring moodily into the camera, no smiles allowed. And I was just doing headshot, black and white portraits. And at the end of each day, I've done on average, 20, 30 photos, I would print them out and stick them to the walls of the space that I'd been given. And at the end of it, there was 173 photos around the walls of people staring at you when you walked into the room. Now, what I did was I put everybody's name underneath the photo, got a marker, printed out, scribbled down Pete, Sheila, whatever. But I also asked everybody to give me the name of a well-loved book. And I also wrote that underneath. And what happened there was the title of the book sometimes caused you to reassess your idea of who it was you were looking at. Because when you look at a portrait of somebody you don't know, you are looking for all these little clues. Your brain is going into a very primal thing. Is this person friend or foe? Are they going to help me out? Are they part of my tribe? Are they a danger to me or to my family or to my tribe? And on a very instinctive level, we start making judgments. But when all you've got is a face looking at you without a smile, you start looking for other things. So you're looking at, you can just see the collar of their shirt coming out. So does it look like an expensive shirt, or is it just a cheap t-shirt? You're looking at how well kempt are they? Have they brushed their hair? Have they got makeup on? Have they sort of trimmed their jowls or smoothed their beard, or are they clean shaven? And all these kind of things cause you to make a kind of instant judgment about them on some level or another. But then if you're given a second piece of information, that second piece of information is either going to reinforce that idea or it is going to undermine that idea. And this second piece of information in this case was the title of a well-loved book. Now, in one case, for example, there was so David's put up The Hobbit as his well-loved book. And you look at him and he's kind of looks like a jolly fellow with a round face, and you go, well, he even looks a bit like a hobbit. Doesn't surprise me, and it reinforces that idea. And then there's this other one where you see this guy who's this sort of big, beefy biker type guy with a beard and scowly face and a leather jacket, and you think, oh, he looks a bit terrifying and all the rest of it. And he's put Black Beauty, a book about a horse from childhood, it's one of these childhood favourites. And you go, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And now you've seen that, it may be you start to reassess. Or somebody else has got, you've got this very gentle, feminine-looking woman who's got Bravo 20, which is, about the SAS and American equivalent of sort of Navy SEALs type thing, and you go, oh, again, I wasn't expecting that. And because you've now got this other bit of information, you now look back at that face and reinterpret it with this new layer of information. So that happens with people all the time. Same thing can happen with anything. So, for example, right, let me show you this. All right, what's this? So, I could take a photo of this, and I could quite straightforwardly call it a ring. And you go, okay, that's a ring, fair enough. What if I take that same photo, and we look at that photo, and I say, Celtic knotwork? And you go, wow, well, there you go. There's little bits of, there's patterning on it, Celtic knotwork. So now I'm drawing attention to the patterning on it rather than drawing to attention specifically about the fact that it's round and it goes on a finger. What if I have a photo of this and I say cheap silver? This ring costs £10. You go, oh, okay, what's that telling me? Is that telling me you're a cheapskate? If I show this ring and I say it's a wedding ring, And it is my wedding ring. It fits on this finger. It is my wedding ring. When Maggie and I got married 25 years and a day ago, we were unemployed, had very little money. It was very much a budget wedding, and the wedding rings that we have were little £10 cheap silver Celtic knotwork rings. And they're incredibly special to us. Just as special to us, if not more special to us, than it would have been if we spent several hundred or even thousands of pounds on amazing gold wedding rings. These represent who we were at the point we got married. So there you go, there's a different story. But if I didn't tell that story and I just had a picture of a ring that said cheap silver wedding ring, you might form all sorts of ideas about, well, who would do that? Are they a cheapskate? Are they just, pulling a fart? You have a different set of judgments. So the words that are being used, or if I hold up this ring and we have a picture of a ring and I say, and in the darkness bind them. Well, anybody who's read Lord of the Rings will recognise that as the one ring to rule them all. So at that point, you're making a reference to a novel. But anybody who hasn't read Lord of the Rings or watched any of the movies and doesn't know that phrase is going straight over their head. So the fact is, whether I'm saying and in the darkness bind them, or I'm saying cheap silver, or I'm saying wedding ring, or I'm saying Celtic knotwork, all of these things change how you are perceiving that ring. So what I wanted to do, actually, Gary, as you raise this question, let's stick up your photo, the photo that you put in last week. Now, what you called this one was surprise view, in quotes, in the High Peak district. So I'm assuming surprise view is the name of the place, and it's in the High Peak district, sort of central the UK, or central England really, so Derbyshire. So it's very much a geographical name. But I want you to consider for a moment the idea of how you might, what would happen if we named this something else. So we could call this a grove of silver beech, because silver birch, sorry, not silver beech, silver birch, because if I recognise my patterning correctly, these are silver birch trees. And a grove, or a line, there's layers of it, so I'll go with the grove. So a grove of silver birch. So at this point, it's not about the place, it's about the subject. However, supposing we called it emerging. There's fog. The bits in the background are more lost in the fog than the bits in the foreground. So if you call it emerging, you immediately get that sense of the trees coming out of the fog. By contrast, supposing you called it retreating or disappearing. Well, now we look at the fog and we feel that the fog is coming in and enveloping it. So we're changing the mood. Call it haunting. Oh, well, now we're thinking about the spooky nature of it. What if you called it winter stillness? Well, now we're really drawing our attention to the fact that there are no leaves on the trees. It's winter stillness. It doesn't seem to be blowing from one side to another. There's a fog. There's a quietness to it. Or supposing you called it anticipation. Oh, anticipating what? Now we're looking at it with an idea of what are they waiting for? What's going to happen next? So you can see that whatever title you use is, without doubt, affecting the way we are looking at the photo. So the question is, as with all the other things I talk about in photography, which is what is the story you are trying to get across? And what is it about your photography which is either enhancing or detracting from that story? And just as the lighting in VG's parrots were detracting from the beautiful colours, but the smile in her sister-in-law's face is adding to the warmth of the person. So the title too can add or detract from. Now, you can get to a point whereby you can come up with some really obscure thing and just everybody kind of goes slightly blank or glazy-eyed, accuses you of being a bit too arty-farty for your own good. But again, it kind of depends on your audience. Some people will react. Some people, it's like poetry or prose. Sometimes we want a little bit of extra layer to what we're doing. But the other bit to this, though, is how comfortable are you doing this? Not all of us are poets, I find words... I'm a talker, I'm a chatter, fine, we can sit down over a cup of coffee or you can watch my podcast and I can blether on for hours. But I'm not poetic in the way that I speak. Now, my wife, by contrast, the words she uses, if you read her blog posts, you read my blog posts, they're kind of chatty. They're just a slight variation on the way that I speak anyway. Maggie's blog posts are more prose. They are rich. They each sentence you feel you can unpack. Each sentence has layers of meaning. Are beautiful to read. And the titles she comes up with for her pictures are also incredibly beautiful and poetic, and they make you stop and think and rethink about what you're doing. But that's the way she creates, and she's developed this over the years in a way that I haven't. So if I tried to come up with interesting poetic titles for my photos, they would just seem a bit naff, to be honest. So I don't tend to bother, but could well be that I'm missing a trick. So, does that answer your question, Gary? It depends. It depends on who your audience is, it depends on how your pictures are being viewed, and it depends on how comfortable you are creating titles for them. I mean, there's no doubt there are some photographers out there who have the title before they go out and get the photo. They've got it. It might be a line from a book, or it might be a song, or it might just be a collection of words that struck something with them. And now they want to go out and create a photo which embodies that story. So they've got the story first, and then the photo comes second. Rather than with most of us, we take the photo and then we go, what do I call it? I don't want to just have another untitled number 479, thank you. So, probably not answering your question, probably giving you some more questions, but that's okay. Hope you find that interesting, Carrie. So, I'll flick back. I'll just have to stick my pad back on again and see if we've got any more comments. Okay, where have we got? Okay, Stacey says, yes, I believe it tells you what's in the shot. So that's about the titles. VG, thanks, Kim. Truly great feedback to work upon. I barely noticed that whites of the eyes were showing up more after you mentioned it. It's only the white that I see now. It kind of is. It's one of those things you don't notice it at the time, but once you sort of do see it, you kind of can't unsee it. Rosie says, I give my favourite shots a title, especially if they're for sale in the gallery, either as a framed print or as a greetings card. It makes it much easier for customers to reorder. Well, absolutely. I mean, there's the practical side of it, without a doubt. But I suppose there's that notion of whether you say, rubber ducks 1 to 4, or whether you're coming up with, deep yellow plastic scourge of society, or environmental impact, or there's different ways of doing it. Maggie chips in, maybe it depends on the why of the photograph rather than the obvious subject matter. Okay, now I like that. That's interesting. So I mean, Gary, let's run on Maggie's notion for a moment. Let's flip back to your trees. You've taken a photo of the trees, you've given the name of the trees, the place, or, we talked about the what they are, but that notion of the why, and this is going back to the why did you take this photo in the first place? it's not just a case of it looked interesting, because there was something about it that looked interesting. There was an idea behind the photo, even if it was only happened while you were out there. You didn't necessarily have to have that idea before you went, although you might have in this case. But when you're there, there's a reason you pulled out your camera. There was something you were trying to capture. What was it? The why of the photo. Why did you take this photo? And maybe if your title is somehow getting in there and describing the why of the photo, then that is what's really adding that extra level of depth to it. That's a brilliant comment, Maggie. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Stacey, exactly. I always title my photographs because there is something that brought it out. Okay, and Rosie, I now realise I need to be more imaginative with my titles. Yeah, same here. You know, I mean, yeah, my titles are very dull indeed. Okay, no, that was a really good question. Thank you for asking that one, Gary, and thank you everybody for chipping in on that. That's great. I really appreciate that. So now I'm going to go on to the final thing that I want to talk about, which is a picture from VG. And let's flip, where are we? So let's flip back over to here. And so for this one, VG said, the light bulb. I wanted to get the glow on the filament, but not successful. So, what we're talking about here, so she's got all these wonderful light bulbs, but the actual filament themselves are blown out. We can see the bulbs, but we can't see the actual filament. And the filament could be quite an interesting part of a light bulb. And in essence, VG, I don't know whether you're going to realise what I'm going to say the moment I say it, but this is exactly the same problem we talked about with the candles a few weeks ago, where you take a photo of a candle and everything else around it is fine, but the actual part of the candle, you're not getting the flame, that bit just whites out. It's the same problem here with exposure. However, what I did here was I'm going to talk you through, I spent a little bit earlier today in response to this photo, or your question on this photo. I hunted throughout the house and managed to find a single lamp, my daughter's bedside lamp, which actually has a bulb with a filament in it. Because these days you don't. All the bulbs we buy seem to be recyclable, environmentally friendly, energy saving bulbs, which just aren't designed like this in the same way. So for a while I didn't think I was going to be able to do anything for you. However, I did. We managed to find this one. And what I want to show you, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through a set of photos and talk about the notion of what happens when you change your exposure settings. So I've created this to have, and I've layered it up. So this photo here, this is our starting point. What I've got is, I scribble the settings into it. So this is 125th of a second shutter speed, and the aperture setting is 5.6, an f5.6. So this is almost, if you like, a kind of bog standard setting. In the days when you used to get those little disposable cameras, they nearly all, where all you did was literally point and click and there wasn't anything to adjust on it. But you could buy them for £5 and that included the development cost when you took them to Boots or Tesco's or whatever to get it done. Their default setting was 125th of a second at f5.6. Now, at this point, in order to get the ambient light, just setting, my ISO has gone up to 1250. You can see the lamp, but the actual center part of it is completely blown out. It's way, way too bright. So with a very high ISO, that's no good. So I took the ISO down to 100. And under the same settings then, we now have this. Now we've lost the outside of the lamp, but that's less important because what I want to try and do now is draw attention to the notion of how the filament is. What we can see is we can see the bulb, we can see the writing on the bulb, but it's still very much whited out here. We're not getting a lot of what's going on. So the first thing I did was I started changing the shutter speed. Okay, so I went from 125th of a second to 160th of a second. And by speeding up the shutter speed, what happens is less light gets into the lens. So slightly darker. 200th of a second, slightly darker. 250th of a second, darker again. But what you start to notice is, from there to there, let's zoom in on that. We're now starting to get some of the patterns within the filament, which are whited out here. Let's go to 400th of a second. We're starting to get more of them. 500th of a second. 640th of a second. The faster I'm getting, the less light that's coming in. Because the light in the centre of the filament is the brightest part, as we speed up the process, there's less of that is able to sort of blow out the sensor. 800th of a second, 1000th of a second, 1250th of a second, 1600th of a second, 2000th of a second, 2500th of a second. Now, what you can also see is everything else is getting darker, but this bit is getting clearer and clearer. 3200th of a second, 4000th of a second, 5000th of a second, 6400th of a second, 8000th of a second. So at 8000th of a second, we can now see that we've got a little bit of the glass. We can't see anything, but virtually nothing of the rest of the lamp. So what you're doing here is, as I decrease the shutter speed, it gets brighter. As I increase the shutter speed, the ambient gets. So what you're trying to find that balance. Do you see that? If you expose for the brightest part of the photo, everything else gets darker. But if you expose for everything else, then the brightest part just gets much brighter. So that's what you're doing if you're changing the shutter speed. Another thing you can do is change the aperture. The aperture, when your f-stop. When you change that, that's about how wide the aperture is and whether it gets narrower. And the narrower it is, the less light it lets in. The wider it is, the more light it lets in. So let's go back here. That was shutter speed. Let's go back to aperture adjustment. And that aperture at 125th, so 125th of a second, 5.6. Now I'm going to narrow the aperture. I'm going to keep the whole thing at 125th of a second. So I'm locking the shutter speed. But I'm going to make the aperture narrower. So the amount the light can get in, the amount of light that can get in becomes less. So again here is blown out. I go to f6.3, f7.1, f8, f9, f10, f11, f13, f14, f16. And you can see the same kind of thing is happening. f18, f20, f22. So when we're at f22 on 125th of a second, we're now able to make out the filament and the fancy patterns in the glass, which is the interesting bit. That's the bit that you are really interested in. The problem we have, though, is with all this, is that we've lost the sense of the light itself, the lamp. You can't really, so you're trying to create that balance between, fine, I want the filament, but then I can't see anything else. So the other thing you then have to do is set up a separate layer of light. So keeping this at 22, I then stick on a flash. Oh, hold on, let's go back to this. So 125th of a second, and sorry. So the center part of it is lit the same, but now because I've got a flash on it, we can actually see. We can actually now see the whole lamp. So you adjust the exposure settings for the bit that you want, which in this case is the filament, and then you light the rest of it with another lighting source, which is more powerful. Now, this is maybe still a little bit too bright. Can we get it darker? So I speed up the shutter speed to 250th of a second. But when I go beyond 250th of a second, I then run into a problem with the flash, whereby the flash can only go to 250th of a second. If I go to 400th of a second, it's not coping. It's flashing. The shutter speed is faster than the flash going off. So the shutter is starting to close again before the flash, all the lights got in from the flash. So you can see we've got the bottom half going. If I go up to 500th of a second, we've lost more of the light. If I go up to 640th of a second, we've lost most of the light. So what you're doing here is you're trying to find a balance between how low you want to go with your aperture, your shutter speed, to get the filament bit that you want, but then how you light up the rest of it. So I know it all seems quite technical. You might want to sort of rewind this bit and watch it over a couple of times. And for those who aren't really into the technical side of photography, apologies there, but you're going to get some of this every now and again. But I did think that it was kind of important to understand that you can adjust. That the main thing is that the bit you were wanting, which was the filament, is too bright in the ambient light. So if you get the rest of it right, that bit. So to adjust that, you either have to speed up with your shutter speed, thereby letting less light in, or you have to narrow your aperture, thereby letting less light in, until you get to a point whereby the light that's coming from the filament isn't overpowering the sensor. Once you've got that, you now need to introduce another light source to light up everything else. And that's where I was then using the external flash. So I hope that helps. I hope that's, quite a kind of long-winded bit. Like I say, you might want to necessarily, you might think about rewinding this bit and watching it again later. But hopefully that does give you some kind of sense of what you do about that. And exactly the same thing applies then to when you were doing the candle a few weeks ago. So that's pretty much about it for the questions and the pictures. So I will just flick back onto my pad, see if there are any more comments. Stacey's got to hop off, working part-time at night, seasonal job. Okay, well, thank you, Stacey, for coming along. Oh, and happy anniversary. I appreciate that. Thanks. And VG says, thank you for taking the time to demonstrate how to capture the lamp. Very interesting. We'll try this weekend and see. We'll watch it a couple of times and try it again. Great. And my job is done. So there we go. If you found this interesting, if you think you would like to support these podcasts, then please go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres for contributions. Always appreciated. That's pretty much it for this week now. Next week I will be talking about Fitcher McAndrew, potters who created... I still have that photo... this mug, the brown one, and I've used a couple of their photos before now in examples of different elements of whether it was backlighting or use of diagonals in photography. So I did a set of photos. So husband and wife team, potters, based about 12 miles north of here. Lovely, lovely couple. And as I did a set of photos for them, and I think there's some really interesting kind of things to come out of that to chat about in photography. So that's next week. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you very much for tuning in. Cheerio.